Welcome to A Flash of Beauty, the podcast, an audio experience dedicated to the further exploration of Bigfoot and the people Bigfoot has revealed itself to. What started as a documentary of personal narrative encounter stories and expert testimony has now shifted into a deeper inquiry into the forever changed lives of those that have witnessed firsthand this hidden truth. My name is Tobe Johnson, co-producer of Flash of Beauty Bigfoot Revealed. Join me along with the crew and creators of this doc, director Brett Eichenberger, producer Jill Rimmon-Snyder, and cinematographer Michael Ferry, as we go back into the trees to sit down once again with each guest in search of the truth, no matter how strange. All right, back with me again is the film crew from Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, Brett Eichenberger, Jill Rimmon-Snyder, and Michael Ferry. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
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 All right, so we have a great guest again here. Rich Germeau is our guest, and Rich, along, the last 5 years or so, I've gotten to get to know on a personal level. And Rich has had an intense background as a police officer and a Bigfoot witness and Bigfoot investigator, but a lot of people don't know, and we kind of get into this out of the gate, that Rich was deeply involved with what is known as the Sasquatch Genome Project, and also is one of the co-founders of what is known as the Olympic Project, which is a serious flesh and blood organization out here looking into the Bigfoot conundrum. And so we talk about that because as all these interviews go through their motions in this documentary, there's a lot on the cutting room floor, and we get into that. So tell me what you guys thought of our interview.
I think, like I said, earlier, we really were just kind of blown away by Rich and what Rich had to say. And it's one of the best interviews that we've done. And fortunately, with the running length of a documentary, we couldn't include more. I wanted to include the entire interview, and the plan in the future is to make that interview in its entirety available for everyone. So stay tuned for that. That's in the works for maybe later on this summer or in the fall. It's an interview you're going to want to sit through because it's captivating. Rich really knows this stuff. He's meticulous. He's a trained observer. He really knows what he's doing, what he's looking at. He's had two incredible sightings, only one of which we had time to mention and talk about in the film. So keep your ears wide open, and you may even want to take notes on this one. It's great.
Yeah. Well, Rich also is going to be a part of this conference we're coming up. We talk a little bit about this debate that we're going to have with Rich and another Sasquatch investigator by the name of Thomas Seaweed. And it's going to be an interesting debate for sure, because we're going to talk about the woo, the flesh and blood, and the paranormal, and the difference between the two, and why people believe what they believe. And Rich has a strong opinion about going from the world of a police officer, having a flesh and blood encounter, to looking at Sasquatch as being linked to something a whole lot stranger. But you guys have wandered across this, as far as interviewing witnesses, all along the way beyond just Rich. You have the stories from myself and Daryl. We get into the fact that maybe we rush into the paranormal too quickly, and I think it's important to at least acknowledge the fact that that's a possibility, because not everything is supernatural. But when you get into something like with Rich, he is so meticulous, and he's leaning into where the trail's going as a police officer, and I think he's actually a professional tracker through the SWAT team. So it's not as though he's short on evidence and training, and that's where he leads with it. I don't know, Jill, talk a little bit about what you think as far as Rich's evidence, as far as this being very strange.
Well, I think if you take his introduction from his first sighting to where he is now, I mean, he followed the breadcrumbs, and when he got to that point where he couldn't deny what was going on, and he was taking a scientific approach and was looking at everything under that lens.
Mhm.
And he reached the point where he's like, this is not adding up. I need to think outside the box.
Mhm.
And as soon as he was able to kind of step outside the box of the classical Newtonian science and its limitations, I
Mhm.
think that's when the story really gets interesting.
Mhm. You know, when someone's on
Yeah.
camera doing a first person narrative retelling of an event, for myself and a lot of other people, you have to gather your thoughts and you have to think with your eyes a little bit. But Rich, and I'll pose this question to you, Mike, as far as a cinematographer here, I've seen the interview, the stuff on the cutting room floor. I've filmed Rich before. He's an intense guy. When he's looking down the barrel of a camera, he does not break eye contact. What's it like to film somebody like Rich that wants to be? I mean, he's not in the shadows at all. He's just with you on camera, intense. Talk about that.
No, I mean, intense is the perfect word for it. I mean, you could you could see it in his eye contact with the camera.
Yeah.
But you could see I mean, deeper than that, you could see into what his thoughts were as he was having his encounters, and that, he works at, as Brett said, he's a trained observer. He's a very perceptive guy. That's his job.
Mhm.
But, after seeing something like that, do you lose trust in the institutions that you operate within? And you really see a picture of a guy whose world is really turned upside down. And just the beginning of that process and his journey. And it's one of the longer interviews we had, and definitely, in my opinion, the most fascinating one,
Mhm.
just because there's just so much there, and there's so much transition, and there's so much exploration. And that's why I loved it. I just think
Mhm.
he's just fantastic on camera.
It's going to be an interesting conference coming up here too. If you want to meet Rich, you can see him on camera for the sequel coming out. We talk about that, Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot, premiering at the second annual Fork Sasquatch Days. Rich will be on hand, not only in the sequel, but for this debate that we have scheduled at this conference. You can get tickets at sasquatchthelegend.com if you'd like to do that. Also, you can come meet us uh, in McMinnville at the McMinnville UFO Festival coming up the weekend before Memorial Day weekend. So I guess that would be the 19th. We're going to have a booth there for not only the podcast, but for the documentary. I'll have some of my Bigfoot wood carvings there, along with some books, and you guys will have swag. You'll have Flash of Beauty gear there as well. Um, come pick our brain. If you have not been to the McMinnville UFO Festival, it is a party for the paranormal and for those interested in the odd. And so it's a fun environment. And I think Travis Walton is going to show up. If you want to get tickets to go meet Travis Walton, I think he's going to be one of the speakers there. They always have great UFO speakers as well. But if you just want to walk around McMinnville and come check out UFO stuff, they got a big parade coming up on Saturday. So we'll be there. We'll have a booth. Come say hi the weekend before Memorial Day weekend in McMinnville, Oregon. All right, so a lot coming our way, and we hope to see you out in McMinnville. But let's get to, while you're all here listening, our interview with Rich Germeau. Let's go ahead and start it now. All right, with me now is co-founder of the Olympic Project out here in my neck of the woods in Washington State, Rich Germeau. Hello, Rich.
Hi.
A man of few words here, as I said earlier, and I think that there's a lot to get through with a guy like Rich, but there's a lot on the cutting room floor with this documentary. And as I was talking to the guys beforehand here, I first heard your name as it relates to your experiences, not only as a witness up this way and your involvement with Derek Randall's and the Olympic Project, but also your work with what is known as the Sasquatch Genome Project, better known by layman's term as Melba Ketchum's study. So my question to you is, what was your involvement with the Genome Project as a sample submitter and beyond that?
I did, like I said, I did field work where I basically used my skill set that I obtained basically through law enforcement and tried to put that into my Bigfoot work, where basically I was out there trying to get biological evidence or whatever other type of evidence that was supportive that I could find to add to the study at that point, in addition to what we were doing with the Olympic project.
Mm-hmm.
But that's about it.
Okay, but you were in constant contact with Melba Ketchum, on a semi-regular basis, if not a regular basis, compiling this study here. Just explain to the folks who are unfamiliar with the study itself what you were trying to do and where things ended up.
Okay, so basically we were trying to obtain biological samples of Bigfoot that would be suitable for DNA extraction, like hair, saliva, tissue, blood, whatever that they could find, that we could submit to this study that she was doing extensive DNA work on, to include mitochondrial and nuclear DNA. And there's a couple benefactors involved, Wally Hersom and Adrian Erickson. And I knew Wally because he had been the benefactor of the Olympic project, and I was on a personal basis with him. I was on a personal basis with Melba too. Just to talk, and we became friends, and for moral support during the study and through the whole entire process, and what essentially we were all exposed to, and what we learned through it, based on the topic and based on even the results, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
And it got to be kind of a crazy thing, really.
Rich, how was Melba even found? And for those who don't even know who she is, what's her expertise? Because just from the streets, people will say that Melba is a lot of things that she's not. First of all, they'll say that, hey, she's just some veterinarian that got lucky with this Bigfoot evidence that was coming her way that she didn't know what to do with. And it was all, put together hastily and done incorrectly. Is that true?
Well, no, I don't think so. I think what happened, the first thing was Destination Truth. And they got some hair samples in a nest in Nepal. I don't know what country. And she was involved in veterinary science because she got her own lab, her own office. And then also she had a DNA lab, too, that she ran on the side, I think, at her office, where she did some forensic work and stuff like that. And she tested their samples for them, and it came back presumptive for what they believed to be Sasquatch. It was a new thing that wasn't in GemBank. And then, just so happened, she was getting involved with Dave Politis really early in the beginning of that thing, and it just so happens that I had been sitting on a sample for a few months, 3 or 4, that I had obtained up from a camera site that I got some pictures of one, and then I swabbed it, which was what I thought I could see saliva on it, and had 2 samples in my freezer that were all in evidence tape and stuff for a matter of, like I said, about 4 months. And I was talking to Jeff Meldrum like weekly too at that time. And then he's the one who, he knew I had the samples, and he recommended her to me. So I got her information through Jeff Meldrum, where I sent her the saliva samples, and then I started a rapport with her. And then I was able to help secure some funding through Wally Hersom into the study. And so, that was a 5-year study. And I probably didn't talk to her every week for the whole 5 years, but there were at least like 3 of it, probably legitimately. I mean, at least weekly, because I was asking her all the time, what's going on with this? Because I think I had I only had credit for one sample, I think sample 11. But as you can see in the study and the supporting documents, I supplied some written documents that went along with it, were like police reports that just basically explained the narrative of the situation and the evidence that I found, and how I, procured it and everything, and how it was packaged and what it was and everything like that. And I sent Meldrum copies of these and then I sent her as well at the same time with the biological samples. And even I sent Meldrum a lot of hair from
Right.
one of the sites. So you can read about all that in there. But, you know, you had said something earlier about where, I think it was in the pre-interview, sorry. But we were talking, well, maybe I should just let you ask another question.
Well, no, I mean, here's Brett. I'll ask you and Mike and Jill. You know, this was one of the early interviews that you got, is sitting down with Rich, and I believe it was over like a 5-hour pre-interview, right?
It was a long time.
Yeah,
It was a long time. Yeah,
it was a long time, and I remember you guys coming back afterwards, and Brett, you just kind of turned to me and said that was a super intense, one of my favorite interviews that we've done so far. So I imagine that you guys had lots of information from Rich that day, and you probably have your fair share of questions for Rich as well. But as far as the intensity of what Rich has done out here on the Olympic Peninsula looking into this stuff, I mean, you're in a whole different position now to where you were 5 or 6 years ago when you were deep into this stuff. But when you were doing this DNA study, were you also an active duty police officer?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was a detective. I quit being a detective in 2009 when I ran for sheriff.
Okay.
But I was a detective up to 2009. So those Sasquatch pictures, I think, were in July of 2009. That's when I got them. So I think I was still a detective at that time. Yeah, I know I was, but it wasn't very much longer. But yeah, so I was a regular detective, and I was on the SWAT team too part of that time too. I think I got out of that too.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I mean, it's
busy.
such a rare asset for them to have, I imagine. So it's quite a get as far as evidence collection is concerned. And as far as the documentary is concerned, Brett, Jill, Mike, there's a couple of people with prior military experience or prior law enforcement experience. Todd Neese, for example, who we haven't spoken to yet, we'll be talking to soon. And what does that mean for the documentary as far as credibility is concerned when you have someone like Rich with a previous law enforcement background?
It lends a ton of credibility because they're trained observers. He's a trained observer, and he knows what he's looking at. This is not a case of misidentification. Both instances that Rich had a sighting, and so this for us, I think for I speak on behalf of myself here, but I know Mike and Jill, I know the three of us were really excited about Rich's interview. And when I say I speak on behalf of myself, I can say that Rich's interview was probably my favorite interview of the entire documentary, because the detail that we got in his interview and the meticulous way that he went about, cataloging and describing his sighting, it goes a long way, and I feel like when people think about credibility in the characters of our witnesses, I think a lot of people out there think of Rich, probably at the top of the heap. So for us, that was a really exciting interview, and I remember how excited we were to get up there and get the interview on camera.
I mean, Rich, you have a video on YouTube with over 500,000 views on it, and it's just used one camera sitting there talking Bigfoot. I think it's maybe a 20 or 30 minute long interview, just kind of done out in a woodshed or something like that. It's very simple, low budget, but the information, the data, the intensity of you retelling everything here. And, a lot of the conversations that we're having here on this podcast assume a lot from the listeners. I mean, we've mentioned some names here like Jeff Meldrum. I'm assuming that the people that listen to this podcast are at a different level of interest than the average listener, and including someone like Rich. I assume most of the listeners here probably already enjoyed Rich's interview and want to look into stuff that he's doing here probably in the future and part two. But as far as where you're at now, Rich, you have stepped away, and Rich is only about 45 minutes away from where I live here, so we see one another. We may see each other this next week here. And I know a little bit about Rich's schedule and what he's doing as far as Bigfoot research, which in this case is nothing, but yet you live like in prime habitat. Tell people a little bit about why that is.
I guess I'll go back to the DNA study because there was one more thing, because I think it lends into this ultimately. And it was a combination of that plus what happened to me at Harstein Island and the subsequent stuff that happened after. And it started with probably when Melba had talked about to me in private, she was kind of puzzled because when they ran some of these samples, even though they knew it was pristine DNA that wasn't damaged, you know how DNA is a double helix? Well, part of one side of the helix was missing. Like, it was gone. It was not visible, but she knew it wasn't damaged DNA, but it wasn't there. She couldn't see it with her eye. And that's when she came up, well, I won't even say it, but it basically, she thought then that maybe it was in another dimension, and that's why you couldn't see it. And it didn't sound like, that was kind of a foreign thing at that time, because that was back in like 2000.
Well, wait a second, Rich. What do you mean you won't mention it? You just mentioned it. So what weren't you mentioning?
Well, she made a stupid comment once, I think. Well, I wouldn't say a stupid comment, but she made like, it's probably floated around out there that she mentioned like maybe that they were hybridized with angels or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you couldn't see part of their DNA. And I think people necessarily took that the wrong way, and I don't think it kind of helped her at the time. But maybe she wasn't that far from the truth. I don't know, but it kind of lends to potentially what I would say lent towards the other part of the experience that we had with that study, because we talked a lot amongst each other, and we all noticed that our phones were getting tapped while we were talking, and we could hear it pick up, and we all knew what it was. You could hear the click, and then the level of the level of the I don't know what the term, but like Nature. We had Nature. They were the first journal that basically had it in perpetual review for like a year and a half, and they leaked information, and I think they undermined people a little bit here and there, and really it wasn't professional at all. And it seemed like more or less they were trying to sink the thing rather than to help it succeed. And then we went on to another journal and the same results, and they end up self-publishing. But basically, whatever we were close to finding in that study was, I think, really close to a really significant truth that really being hidden from us, essentially. And I think that that's why a certain level of it seemed like they came down on her pretty hard. Her whole life's been destroyed since that thing. Her lab went under. She got an F from the Better Business Bureau right after all this stuff happened, and she can't testify anymore as a forensic expert witness in court. And she's ruined, essentially, just because of this one thing. And you wonder why.
Do you feel like that ruined you at all?
Oh, no. I mean, I was just part of it. I wasn't one of those people, but I certainly think that anybody who was in that study probably was on the radar of somebody who was paying close attention, because we were onto the cover-up of a really big lie that spans a lot of different stuff. But I think Bigfoot in particular is potentially, because of the interdimensional attributes and all of these, like my experience where they kind of displayed to me that they defied time and space as we know it, and are bound to it, right? It lends you to believe that they may be connected to something that we are kind of unaware of, like interdimensional type stuff, like inner space and not outer space, something like that. And maybe that, the military-industrial complex, and I won't get in too far into conspiracy, but maybe the military-industrial complex and the central banking system working together and essentially trying to maintain a certain level of control over the people have led him to believe in something that maybe isn't true on a really big scale. Now, Bigfoot in particular, the existence of it and its actual attributes lead you to this truth doorway that if you enter it, it kind of starts to open up a lot of other things to you if you're paying close attention. right? And maybe we were really close to it with scientifically with the DNA showing like serious attributes to this thing that show interdimensional capabilities. I don't know, like inner space, which is maybe they don't want you going anywhere near that. So potentially that's why it all ended up the way it did.
Well, so rather than walking back the comments, like some people do, when the rubber meets the road, you and even Melba, you say that she was ruined by this, but yet she hasn't walked back the evidence and her findings, and you certainly haven't either. In fact, you guys have leaned in twice as hard, maybe Melba a little more privately than you. Of course, you both are pretty private, but I don't know. Jill, Mike, maybe I'll bounce a question off of you. Looking over all the witnesses that you've talked to, and I know we're getting into the paranormal thing here twice as quick as maybe we should be, even though we can't help ourselves because of the the temptation to talk about the truth here. As far as I'm concerned, the paranormal and Sasquatch are intertwined, and there's no way to deny it. But do you think that's a mistake at all? Let me ask you, Mike, is that a mistake that we are leaning into the paranormal too quick here? Do you find yourself, because you're pretty new to this, Mike, and I've asked you all individually whether or not my take on this or Rich's take on this is a mistake. What do you think about us leaning in on the paranormal too quickly?
No, I don't think it's a mistake to lean in, this quickly. I mean, there's so many people out there discovering or researching the scientific impact of it, but why the hell can't we get into the paranormal too? I mean, there's just so many questions and so many, Rich was one of the first people we talked with that they kind of brought up, just strange aspects of this phenomenon. And I don't know how you can't go into the paranormal. I mean, just, it's the way it moves, the way it materializes, dematerializes, mind speak, all of that kind of stuff, that's paranormal evidence. And if you're not looking at that and exploring that, I think you're doing the subject a disservice.
Yeah, Jill.
First off, Tobe, we should always dive in with the paranormal first and foremost in every discussion.
Agreed.
Yeah. Talking to my parents, we'll just start right there, paranormal. So what I really appreciate about the interview we had with Rich was he talks about his sighting when he was on duty, and he was a non-believer. He said in the interview, and I quote, "I thought it was all a fairy tale." And then going into his research and how his scientific approach to it, and like Brett had mentioned, the meticulous approach to how he was gathering and how he was conducting his research. And then as things outside of the ordinary started happening, he couldn't discount it, and how, like he said, he's a trained observer, so he has to take everything into consideration. And I think that, and thank God Rich, you are open-minded, because I think a lot of people who could have been in your situation would have just brushed it off and tried to make up excuses or play it off as coincidence. But the things that were happening to you, especially, and I don't want to spoil too much in the sequel, because we do get into the story about how your story about driving home and the time space being jumped. And I just think that I think we can't ignore it. And especially you were like, it almost seemed like the more you were open to it, the more it was kind of like the law of attraction. You started attracting more of it. Would you agree with that at all?
Yeah, well, this is what I just talked to Toby about this the other day, and I think what Bigfoot was for me, because we won't get into other stuff, because I mean, this thing goes beyond this for me. It just kept going. It just happened to be. It's like It's the follow the white rabbit moment, from the movie The Matrix, where they say, you see the rabbit and you follow it because it's something out of the ordinary that it's not supposed to be there. And then it starts, if you follow it the right way and do what you're probably supposed to do, you don't get stuck on it. What you want to try to find out is where did it come from and why is it here? And how can it do the things that it can do? And you have to try to ask yourself those kind of questions. And what it ends up leading you to is that you have to start questioning a lot of things about what you think. And ultimately, it leads you to a place that you have to essentially form a new perspective based on what you learn related to this topic.
Now, were you warned at all, Rich, by people on the Olympic Project or in the Bigfoot community not to ruin what you had as far as evidence concerned, even though the evidence was pointing in a certain direction? Were you, warned even in private?
No, I don't think I really gave them time to react to it, to be honest with you, because it's like when I go, I don't know, nobody warned me. Nobody said anything to me. I just did my thing. And I kind of separated myself from it all at the same time. I kind of, it was over a period of a couple of years where I kind of pulled back out of it, where I started to slow down my research and where I just kind of cut off all communication. Because really, at that point in time, I was at a point where I just really didn't know what we were dealing with. And I thought it was maybe reckless or potentially, I didn't want to be out advising people. I didn't want to do like expeditions and stuff where we're teaching people how to go out and solicit or look for something that we really don't know or understand. And I had a fairly, rattling experience with something that had the ability to project power and energy, probably in the form of frequency, to manipulate you and to get some sort of a emotional or physical action out of you, or an emotional response. And and then they use other mechanisms to basically remote locate you, and they want you, like in my case, I think that they wanted me. They knew that I would consider and understand the tactical ability and the projection, the power, meaning that that's really what was behind it. They want them to see the ability that we can do these things, right? That we can defy this or that. And to me, it seemed kind of reckless to send people out that really don't know what they're getting into to go out and look for something like this and then solicit contact or ongoing interaction. I didn't know at that point. So I didn't really feel comfortable with going in the direction where people were going to go and do that, train people essentially.
Well, I mean, you're a whistleblower for the, as a police officer, and you're a whistleblower when it came to this as well. And I know that you must have got some pushback because of the fact that you were just willing to speak truth, no matter what the consequences were. I mean, you don't have the same, friendships. You're not involved with the community like you used to be. So there was some friction.
Well, I think that they mostly thought I was crazy, probably, and they didn't want to. My ideas were probably a bit too radical for what their picture of what this thing was, and what their what kind of I guess interaction or relationship they wanted with whatever they wanted this thing to be. So whatever I thought and said, and what my experiences were and how I interpreted them, I think was threatening overall to they really wanted. So they didn't really care about the truth all that much, or paying attention to me, and they were just more or less glad to kind of see me disappear and go away, even though I don't, I'm always kind of around, but I don't talk to any of these people, just you, nobody else. And that's kind of what I think. I think that I'm not really, I'm just kind of different from them in that way, and maybe the truth that I have is a little bit threatening.
Yeah, but would you say that you were hesitant too, as far as getting closer to the phenomena as it presented itself? And talk a little bit about if you feel comfortable about that hesitancy to look into the research, even privately.
What do you mean, later?
Yeah, well, I mean, I know that you're in a different place with it now, maybe than you were a year ago, but I mean, Bigfooters call this the push-pull effect, right? Where you're pulled in and pushed away all at the same once. There's a huge adrenaline dump when you look into this phenomenon and find out that it's real, but there's also consequences of looking into it for the fact that it's not some damn dirty ape. Just talk a little bit about the complexity of that.
Oh, well, sure. I mean, I already touched on it a little bit because, at least in my opinion, based on what my experience is, and after I've had enough years, I've had years now since my Harstein incident happened. That was 13 years ago now. So I've had a long time to think about all this and to utilize everything I've ever seen or everything I've known or every experience that I've had, and to be able to really try to consider the gravity of the whole thing, basically, especially the Harstein incident and everything that happened after, but even the incident itself and the physical attributes that I noticed at that time, and then my experiences now where this has all led me to, and the fact that I guess I'll just have to tell you what I think that there's some sort of a higher being that resonates at some sort of at a higher frequency. And so they're not governed necessarily by the same three-dimensional prison that we are, and they don't have to abide completely by the limitations of it. So, and if they are resonating at higher frequency, you could also think that they potentially are of lower density. So even though they have this large, immense size, and they look huge and muscular, that maybe something that we think is visually looks to us like it could be 1,000 pounds, maybe it's only like 400 or 500 pounds. So it would have less of the gravity effect on it than we have, meaning that gives it these things the ability to maneuver the way they do, or walk basically essentially silently, float essentially, what people could say, or climb these trees and not bust the limbs off, or just move the way that they do, because maybe their actual physical makeup, the fact that they may be resonating at a much higher frequency than we are, but able to still reside here, is giving them this extra ability. Makes sense to me.
Right. Any other questions here from the gang? I could keep going.
Yeah, Rich, I want to go back to the nucleus of what we were just talking about, the paranormal. Seeing as how you've been, in deep on both sides of it, with folks that are, for and against the paranormal, what do you think it is about the paranormal that scares people so much? Why are people afraid to say that, this is something that, science doesn't have the means to measure or observe right now, like, Newtonian science suggests it does? Why can't people kind of open their minds to it, in your opinion?
I think it's at the level, I think it's the amount of time that they've been exposed to it, right? And their awareness of it, of this paranormal type stuff, the TV shows, the conditioning. It's been integrated as, and part of their psyche now over the last, 10, 15 years in a heavy way, even with Unsolved Mysteries and stuff. But really, with Monster Quest and shows like that, and then the ghost shows and UFO stuff and the movies and everything else, it's integrated into the psyche. But, everybody has, this picture in the viewpoint in this, this life that they depict and everything, how it sits. And I think that the paranormal in particular starts to lay challenges in a lot of brainwashing and conditioning, especially at the state we're at now, where we're at an advanced state in it, where people have, consumed it to a certain level of to where they're at now, where they actually want to see physical proof. You know, they don't want to talk about it anymore and see the investigations. They want to see where it all leads to and what it all means, right? But maybe they don't really have the enhanced perception at this point to go along with what they kind of desire, because they're still stuck in the old way of thinking and the old life that they're essentially indoctrinated into. And so we're at a position, I think, where they really don't want to know more, but at the same time, it's to protect themselves and to maintain what they have. And I think that we're going to probably end up pushing through that at some point pretty soon.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think that's kind of where we're at right now.
No, that makes perfect sense, Rich. It feels like, you know, as we progress as a spiritual society, and I'm not talking, you know, religion per se, but you know, I think there's going to be some events, and there has been some events that have brought people closer to spirituality. You know, obviously in the last 20 years, maybe even starting with 9/11, that might be the big dividing line in the sand, where people have thought about, you know, higher beings, and you know, when we really got to kind of look evil in the eye. And so maybe as we progress as humans, I feel like it's natural for us to evolve as spiritual beings. And maybe that's when we get to that point where someone realizes that it's like the wind. You don't need to see it. You see the actions of the wind, but you're never going to see the wind.
Well, yeah, it's like that. I think, you know, it's kind of this. I think you have to like be there before you can go there, for one. In your mind, you have to be there before you can physically go there. You know?
Yeah.
And the other, yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, probably, really.
And just to piggyback on what Brett was saying, Rich, what do you think is going to move the needle for the masses to accept and start changing their way of thinking, to consider the paranormal as something that is normal?
I don't know. Do you really want to go down this road? I mean, what you're asking is if what is it going to take to rattle people enough to essentially start to get them to think about everything in a different way. Well, it's going to take a great interruption in their lives, probably, in order for us to get to a place like that, because everybody is kind of stuck living a material life, you know, based on certain disciplines and principles that we have in place now that is kind of contradictory to a point of, I guess you could say, enlightenment or accession, or however you pronounce that word, into a higher consciousness or different perspective. I mean, we're still dealing with pretty primitive social problems, I guess you could say, right now. And you look at humanity in general, and so you're at one point you're in a spiral of regression and acceptance of regressive behavior. And then the other side of it, you want to be progressive and move to a different way and higher way of thinking. So both of these things happening at the same time is pulling. So one of them is going to have to give way at a certain point. And I think ultimately there's enough people that want to do better and not regress. And it may not be the minority, but it may be enough of a super minority. Or it may not be the majority, but it may be enough of a super minority to be able to kind of raise things up high enough to overshadow, I guess, all this regressive behavior that you see.
Okay, well, let's think about this.
Long answer.
Well, if we were to take a step back, like when you hear of researchers and investigators going out in the woods, what the people who are just kind of out trying to have an experience, or just to try to see something, or maybe to find a print, what would your recommendation be? Like, what should they be doing to be able to open their mind while they're out in the woods to a bigger experience?
Well, I think that everybody has to start somewhere with this thing and to work their way up. it's a process, right? And people seem to level out at different levels in this, and some people just keep going. So I would say just kind of follow it for where it goes and start asking questions related to the phenomena in general, and just ask yourself what are the most obvious things. And I think those obvious things, the answers to them will kind of lead you in a direction away from probably classical science and more into the area that we've been talking to. And once you get there, you progressively probably have to start opening your mind up and consider all the evidence in all aspects and history, and start even looking into old stories and fairy tales and everything else, and start to wonder why all these things are part of our culture and our history, and what they maybe mean and how they relate to this, and start looking at it in a whole world view essentially, and how that relates to this, and and I guess lead yourself all the way up the ladder as far as you want to go.
Rich, I want to go back to an interview I did in the mid-2000s with a guy named Jeff Boiler. He was a deputy sheriff in the Three Sisters Wilderness, off-duty cop, hiking one of the South Sisters, and had a sighting. He said to me in public and in private that when he saw the Sasquatch, he profiled it as he would a perpetrator. He saw it as a perp. He saw it as a human. It was making overtures to him that it was going to outmaneuver him and outwit him. It had a human quality to him. He could tell as a cop that the shit was about to go down. And so that's what really made him nervous. Now, the story goes on, and people can see his detailed encounter in an episode from season 1 of Paranormal Encounters on the Sci-Fi Channel called Watched in the Woods. Let me ask you about your encounter. As a cop, you saw something more than, just an animal. Talk to people about the difference between what you saw that day compared to another animal in the woods, and why Jeff Boiler's description of this thing as a perpetrator is so important as far as a cop.
I think that I probably have described it the same way at different points, just like him, as far as I tactically sized it up essentially. The first time that I saw it in La Push, and the one crossed in front of me, that was one of the first things I thought about, because it changed my behavior, because I had to consider the fact that it appeared humanoid to me. It was, a humanoid type being. So obviously, you consider the aspects of it, and that it's got to be highly intelligent. And you look at its size, and it's physically capable, and the fact that it's undetected, essentially, that tells you that it's very stealthy, and that it definitely has all the advantages over you in its environment, and probably any environment for that matter. And that's without any type of paranormal attributes or anything like that. I mean, I was in awe of it. I was in great respect when I had seen it, because I was like, this thing, there's nothing you could do to stop it if it wanted to get you. That's what I thought. If it wanted to like ambush you, or I mean, there's nothing you could do, right? You'd just be gone. And then when I saw the one at Harsting Island, and how fast it moved when and silently, that's what I think I talk about that too, where I considered it tactically, in the fact that in the speed in which I saw it move, and then that's something that stuck with me, is the didn't make a sound, completely silent, moving across this area, and then just it was gone and nothing. And but the way how fast it was, I knew that it was 20 yards away from me, but it was gonna, by the time I turned, took 3 or 4 steps, it would catch me. It was like an unnatural speed, and so I was really intimidated by that too. So much so that I ran directly away from it, because it was closer to the road instead of towards my car.
Did you write a report up too, Rich? Sorry to interrupt. Did you have to write a report up?
I wasn't on duty. Oh, you mean on the first one?
Yeah.
I did write a report. I wrote I wrote it in the computer system at the La Push PD, and then I actually wrote a memo to the Qualm County Sheriff's Office about
So that
it.
is that a
And,
part of the police record? Is that something people can look up if they want to? Is that part of a FOIA request that could be had?
well, they could try to file a request with the tribe because it might be in their system, and I don't know if the memo ever still exists or not. I gave it to this guy named Matt Murphy, and he still works at the sheriff's office. But yeah, but I think it was more of a joke. He wanted me to write a memo anyway, so who knows if he really turned it in or not. But I took it serious because I had just seen it, so I was ready to tell the truth, right there. I mean, everybody noticed that I was physically rattled when I came in the door, and they're like, "What happened to you? What did you just see?" And I'm like, "You'll never guess what I just saw. I just seen a Bigfoot at Lonesome Creek." And then, but yeah.
And we should let Brett, Jill, and Mike know that the sightings continue to happen in La Push near where Rich had that initial encounter. In fact, just last year, there were the beach itself near La Push is a known hikers hotspot for world travelers, right? I mean, they get express permits to go up and down that coastline, right?
The northern part, yeah, I think so. I think down in the first and second and third beach there, that's just general access mostly. But the part between La Push or the Quileute River north to Quinault area, up to Nia Bay, that is by permit, I believe.
Right.
Access.
So recent encounters, as recent as last year, in and around where Rich had his encounter, I followed up on one of those encounters briefly within the last 6 months. Didn't have anything happen. In fact, I've had very few things happen up here in the last 5 or 6 years off my property myself, but maybe someday Rich can take me to one of the hot spots. I think you did take me to Hartstein Island. You and I did a little walkabout there once, and you found some ancillary evidence near Julie Scott's case, which, if people don't know, you followed up on a extended experiencer by the name of Julie Scott, who is having long-term activity around her rental property, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know how long they had lived there, but yeah, that's the story. I never talked to her. That was all Derek talking to her.
Okay. Derek Randalls of the Olympic Project. But stuff still goes out out there at Hartstein Island. Stuff still happens in La Push, and stuff is going to keep happening all around the Olympic Peninsula. I want to mention something here real quick before we move on, is that, Rich, you're going to be a part of the second annual Fork Sasquatch Days, which also is going to have the premiere of Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot, coming up this Memorial Day weekend. You can get tickets now at SasquatchTheLegend.com. But Rich and I had been trying for the last 3 or 4 years, because Rich has a strong opinion about his worldview as it relates to Sasquatch. And we're going to have a debate between Rich and Native American Thomas Seaweed, who has a very different opinion about what's going on. And that's going to be scheduled at the actual event coming up this Memorial Day weekend. Talk to people a little bit about, do you think it's important to have this debate, besides the fact that it's going to be a lot of fun and you guys have strong opinions? Talk to people about why you think you should be transparent.
We'll see how it goes, to be honest with you, because it's going to be, I think that how can you really oppose each other? I think it's more of a complimenting of each other, because what I'm just thinking is just another level above what he is experiencing. It's just an explanation of these events, more or less, and then you take it to these steps in your own psyche, I guess, or of looking into other things to try to explain these aspects, like Ron Moorhead wrote a book, Quantum Bigfoot, to try to explain this stuff, and it makes a lot of sense, and maybe he was on the right track. But those are just, a way to explain the interactions and your own experiences, so I don't know how that you really can. We'll find out how it goes. because I think that
Mhm.
some of those people have some animosity related to, the changing of their topic. So maybe that, who knows? We'll see.
We will see. It's coming up this May, the 26th through the 28th in Forks, Washington. Thomas is nice enough to step on the stage and do that as well. And they're both real well-spoken guys on the topic, and they're not short of their own opinion. They're both very certain about the flesh and blood element and about the paranormal link. And maybe it's a mix between the two. I think it might be myself. Obviously, I'm biased. I'm going to be helping host this event here, so that's when I need my co-host Nancy Fry, who's going to take up the flesh and blood debate herself here to kind of moderate and mediate alongside me for this debate. I don't know, Brett, Jill, Mike, I see smiles on your faces. I mean, I know there's going to be a little bit of fireworks, but probably not as bad as people think there might be because of the fact that these guys have strong opinions. They're both gentlemen when it comes to this subject matter, and they both care a lot about it. And you've had a chance to talk to Thomas and now Rich. So tell me what you think is going to happen.
I'm really excited to see it happen and just to see what the questions that arise. But my question to Rich is, we talk about science versus paranormal activity, and we've talked to, in the second film, you'll see an interview with Simeon Hine talking about how this paranormal phenomena is science that just hasn't been discovered yet. And so, Rich, you mentioned that maybe the paranormal aspect is maybe just another level of what Thomas's view is. Can you just speak to that? Do you think we're just watching some undiscovered science with all this paranormal activity?
I think, honestly, at least in my situation, in my case, I think that my experiences related to this topic, in combination with the rest of my life and everything else that's happened to me, has made me question a whole lot of things related to science and pretty much every other aspect of my existence. And it actually has gone against supporting science for me, to be honest. And has basically led me to a place that thinks we need to kind of retool everything, all of these disciplines, and maybe, look at things a different way and maybe start investigating our past and find out if it's even the real one that we know of. Maybe it was different than we think, and that rework things up and find out what's really happened. Because I think that maybe we've been on the wrong path with a lot of things, and maybe this paranormal thing is an opportunity to straighten us out and to maybe come to a future where you intertwine, like, both together what we understand as science, physical science now, and this quantum, that's out there, and put both of them together to get the most out of it and maybe the most out of advancement of humanity in the future. Because maybe that's where this can help.
And I also think what I personally hope the takeaway from this debate, or I'm going to call it a discussion. It's going to be a very elevated discussion on the topic. I'm hoping it gives people the confidence who have experienced things that they haven't been able to fit into the right silo of information, for them to maybe step into an acceptance that they experience something that falls outside the norm, outside the flesh and blood paradigm. And maybe that's what we can all hope for, is like the takeaway that everyone will walk away with a better understanding of each side and step forth open-minded.
Yeah, I think it'll be beneficial.
Yeah, I think so too. I it's the right people having the discussion. If you're interested in seeing it and seeing part 2, you can do it. SasquatchTheLegend.com. Tickets on sale now. This Memorial Day weekend. I appreciate you coming online here, man, and I will be seeing you in the future here shortly if all goes well. All right.
Thanks, Rich.
Thanks for
Appreciate
having
it.
This has been a Resonance Productions podcast. If you have questions, comments, or your own encounter story you would like to relay to the show, email us at bigfootrevealedpod@gmail.com. Also, if you're just discovering us, you can watch our documentary, A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, on most major video streaming platforms.